Welcome back to another episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, your go-to source for staying sharp in a fast-moving world of manufacturing, packaging, coding, and beyond. I'm your host Alexa, and today we'll discuss topics ranging from the government shutdown's impact on food assistance programs, to a major development in the U.S.-China trade deal, to the Supreme Court's deliberation on President Trump's sweeping tariffs, and finally, the alternative tariff options available to President Trump if the court rules against him. The Federal Reserve has cut its key interest rate by a quarter point, bringing it down to 3.9% from 4.1%. This marks the second rate cut this year, aimed at boosting economic growth and hiring amidst elevated inflation. Fed Chair Jerome Powell emphasized that further rate cuts are not guaranteed. He stated there are strongly differing views about how to proceed in December. Powell added that the further reduction in the benchmark rate is not a foregone conclusion, far from it. The ongoing government shutdown, which began on October 1st, has disrupted the release of critical economic data such as jobs and inflation reports. Powell acknowledged the challenge, saying, "If there were a significant or material change in the economy, one way or another, I think we'd pick that up through this." He also noted that the lack of data might lead the Fed to proceed more cautiously in the coming months. Kennedy Goldberg, head of U.S. rate strategy at TD Securities, remarked, "Powell poured cold water on the idea that the Fed was on autopilot for a December cut." Powell explained that excluding the impact of tariffs, inflation is not so far from our 2% goal. Prices for items like apartment rent and car insurance have slowed, which the Fed is monitoring closely. Before the shutdown, monthly hiring gains had slowed to an average of just 29,000 over the previous 3 months. The unemployment rate ticked up slightly to 4.3% in August from 4.2% in July. Major companies like UPS, Amazon, and Target have announced layoffs, which the Fed is watching carefully. The Fed announced it would stop reducing its massive security holdings starting December 1st. This change might slightly lower long-term interest rates, such as those for mortgages, but it's not expected to have a major impact on consumer borrowing costs. Powell summarized the Fed's cautious approach, saying, "For some part of the committee, it's time to maybe take a step back and see if there really are downside risks to the labor market, or see whether in fact the stronger growth that we're seeing is real." The Trump administration has announced it will partially fund the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, for November. The decision comes after 2 federal judges ordered the government to keep the nation's largest food aid program running. SNAP is a critical lifeline for about 1 in 8 Americans, and it costs over $8 billion each month to operate. However, due to the shutdown, the government will use an emergency fund containing just $4.65 billion. That's only enough to cover about half of the normal monthly benefits. This partial funding also raises serious concerns about what might happen in December if the shutdown isn't resolved. For millions of beneficiaries, November payments have already been delayed, and it's still not clear exactly how much each household will receive or when those funds will become available. The USDA has warned that it could take states weeks or even months to make the necessary system changes to send out these reduced benefits. The decision has drawn sharp criticism. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell, who led one of the lawsuits, stated, "The Trump administration has the means to fund this program in full, and their decision not to will leave millions of Americans hungry and waiting even longer for relief." The situation is creating real hardships for families across the country. The average SNAP benefit is usually about $190 per person. Karina Betancourt, a mother of 3 in Arizona, shared that she expects to receive only $400 this month instead of her usual $800. She anticipates having to rely more on local food banks to feed her children. In New Jersey, a paralyzed man named Jamal Brown highlighted the difficult choices people face, saying, "If you don't have the access to the food stamps, you're going to go to the cheapest thing that you can afford." California's Attorney General Rob Bonta stressed the urgency of the situation. "These are folks who are hungry," he said, "and every day matters." While SNAP faces this major shortfall, there was some relief for another program. The Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infant, and Children, known as WIC, received an additional $450 million infusion. This comes after some states warned they only had enough money to operate their WIC programs until the middle of this month. As state governments and food food banks work to fill the gaps, the future of full funding for these essential programs remains uncertain. Many are watching closely to see how the administration and Congress will address this ongoing crisis. After months of posturing and threats, President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping have reached a deal that appears to turn back the clock on their trade war. While the agreement has been hailed by President Trump as a roaring success, it essentially undoes some of the damage from the very trade war he initiated. For now, three-digit tariffs are off the table, but import duties on both sides are still higher than they were in January. The deal does bring some stability. China has resumed buying U.S. soybeans, a critical point for American farmers. Beijing has agreed to purchase 12 million metric tons by January and at least 25 million metric tons annually for the next 3 years. This is a significant development, especially since soybean imports from the U.S. had dropped to zero in September. Additionally, both countries have agreed to a one-year truce on other contentious issues. China will pause its new export permitting rules for rare earth metals, and the U.S. will suspend its recently imposed port fees on China-linked vessels. However, the deal has its critics. Cornell University economist Eswar Prasad noted, "It is hard to see what major gains the U.S. has made in the bilateral relationship relative to where things stood before Trump took office." Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer echoed this sentiment, stating that Trump started a trade war, created a major mess for businesses, consumers, and soybean farmers, and then he celebrates for trying to clean up the very mess he created in the first place. For his part, Chinese President Xi Jinping acknowledged the recent twists and turns and suggested that both sides should be focusing on the benefits of cooperation rather than falling into a vicious cycle of mutual retaliation. Looking ahead, the future is still uncertain. The agreement provides a temporary reprieve, but fundamental issues like China's manufacturing dominance and market access barriers for U.S. companies remain unaddressed. While the deal injects some much-needed stability into the global economy, many are watching to see if this truce will lead to a lasting resolution or if it's just a pause before the next round of tensions. President Trump has warned that the country could be rendered defenseless if the Supreme Court strikes down the sweeping tariffs he imposed on nearly every country this year. The justices have sounded skeptical of his claims to have unlimited authority to impose these tariffs. The truth is, even if the court rules against him, President Trump has plenty of other options to keep taxing imports aggressively. As Georgetown trade law professor Kathleen Clausen puts it, "It's hard to see any pathway here where tariffs end." She added, "I am pretty convinced he could rebuild the tariff landscape he has now using other authorities." So, what are these other tools? First, there is Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which lets the president counter unjustifiable or discriminatory trade practices. Trump has already used this aggressively against China. Second, he could use Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This allows him to impose tariffs on imports he decides are a threat to national security. He has already used this to tax foreign steel, aluminum, and even kitchen cabinets. Another option is Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which allows for temporary tariffs of up to 15% to address trade deficits. Finally, the administration could revive a Depression-era law, Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, also known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, authorizes the president to impose tariffs of up to 50% on countries that discriminate against U.S. businesses. This law has a notorious reputation for worsening the Great Depression, but it remains a potential tool. While the Supreme Court deliberates, it's clear that the era of high tariffs may be far from over regardless of the outcome. The average U.S. tariff has already soared from 2.5% to 17.9% since January, reaching its highest level since 1934. Welcome to Recall Radar, our latest short segment where we do our best to keep you up to date with products that are flying off the shelf and back to manufacturers because, as you might have guessed it, they're being recalled for your safety. Starting off, we have Golden Island Fire-Grilled Pork Jerky, which is sold at Costco and Sam's Club. You're looking for dates ranging from October 23rd of 2025 to September 23rd of 2026. The reason for this recall is that this product may contain potential contamination with metal wire from a conveyor. So what are you going to do? You're not going to consume it, and you're going to return it to the store for a refund or dispose of it safely. Moving on, we also have Hormel Fire Braised Frozen Boneless Chicken Breast and Thigh products. It's sold to restaurants, cafeterias, and food service outlets nationwide via HRI commercial food service. The reason for this recall, there's potential contamination with metal from a conveyor belt. and what to do. So, food service providers should check their freezers and dispose of the affected products. Hormel has notified all customers directly. The next product affected includes pre-cooked pasta meals, including linguine, fettuccine, penne, and heat-and-eat meals from brands like Trader Joe's, Walmart, and Albertsons. The reason for this recall: there's contamination with Listeria midocytogens linked to pasta produced by Nate's Fine Foods. The impact so far: there's at least 6 deaths and 27 illnesses reported across 18 states since August of 2024. What to do: you want to check your refrigerators and freezers for recalled products and dispose of them or return them for a refund. And our last affected product is Haagen-Dazs chocolate dark chocolate mini bars, the 6-count packages. You're looking for batch code LL8519501. You're also looking for best by dates of January 31st of 2027. The reason for this recall: there's undeclared wheat due to a likely packaging error during production. Consumers with wheat allergies or sensitivities should dispose of the product or return it to the place of purchase for a refund. It's time to stop overlooking recalls and start checking your pantries to make sure that you don't have any of these affected products. If you do, drop a comment, let us know. If we missed anything, also drop a comment, and we'll keep you updated. This episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update is brought to you by our SNEED-JET Freedom 41 case coder, featuring a cutting-edge 4-inch tall stitched printhead, making it easy to print large, clear barcodes, logos, date codes, lot codes, and more. Enjoy robust performance and versatility that will transform your packaging with professional, easy-to-read information. To learn more, visit sneedcoding.com. That's it for this week's episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, but the conversation doesn't stop here. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you never miss an update. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let us know what topics you'd like to see us dive into next. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and we'll catch you in on the next one. Bye, everyone.